Hello, I'm Colum Lynch. I'm the UN reporter for Devex News, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Jesper Brodin, the CEO of Ingka Group, which you will all know is the company that controls and manages the vast majority of IKEA furniture stores around the world. So, Mr. Brodin has decided to move on from IKEA and in the coming weeks, and he is apparently not ready for retirement. Earlier in October, the Swedish government announced that they would nominate Mr. Brodin as a candidate for the leadership at the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And so why don't we get started? It's no secret that the UN Refugee Agency, is facing some hard times. Budget cuts from the US and from other donors have resulted in UNHCR having to lay off some 5,000 workers in the last year. Filippo Grandi, the current High Commissioner, recently said that Refugee Agency is in a $300 million hole, and this is in a year where it has already seen an overall budget shrink by as much as $1.3 billion. There's rising anti-refugee sentiment both in the US and Europe. And so the question for you is, given those conditions, why do you want this job? And what, if anything, if you have any thoughts on plans that you have to get UNHCR out of this hole?
Well, thank you so much. I smile at your description. Obviously, it's a very serious situation for the UN and for UNHCR, but it's true. This is, I think, the perfect storm for the organization, with the budget cuts, with the also the necessity of having even more displaced people in the world to care for and to protect in order to fulfill its mission based on the 51 Convention for Refugees. So why am I interested? Well, first of all, when I got the question to have the opportunity to serve the most needing people on the planet, is very hard to say no to such an opportunity. I've had the pleasure and privilege to work with UNHCR for many years. And the reason mainly being that IKEA is actually, and my company is entirely owned by the IKEA Foundation, who has been a long-standing partner for the HCR for many years. And as such, I've had several occasions, opportunity to work on the field in crisis, but also in development, providing jobs and whatnot. It is a time where the UNHCR is more needed than ever. And if I look into the future, I actually believe we shouldn't be in denial that the role might be even more important. If we add to the human conflicts that we see today, if we add the impacts of climate change, it's going to be even more important. So the task at hand to address the acute financial situation, which has started, by the way, already by Filippo Grandi, will still remain one of the priorities for next year. But also to transform the organization. There is expectations for a higher efficiency and effectiveness. And there is, of course, an incredibly important need to get ready and build a resilient UNHCR for the future. So why me? I come with experience from leading and transforming organizations for many years. I have 30 years of experience with a company of 170,000 people in 40 countries. I've had experiences the last 8 years as CEO to lead through very difficult times, pandemic, war, economic turmoil, and manage to both transform, increase co-worker satisfaction, and actually make sure that we deliver to the expectations of our owners over the year. So there you have the background.
Right. So I'm personally quite intrigued by your candidacy. I've covered the UN for quite a long time, and I've seen a lot of campaigns for leadership in UN agencies. And you almost never see a corporate or business leader. I mean, they're diplomats, former politicians, UN veterans. The last two heads of UNHCR, or the current head and the previous one, Antonio Guterres, was the former prime minister, and Grandi is sort of a veteran of the UN system. You come out of a completely different background, and so maybe give us some more detail on what you think you bring to the table as a business owner, as a business leader, and how that you could apply that to UNHCR.
Well, I think I bring two things. Yeah, to a certain extent, I am the peacock in the land of penguins. So I am the profile that stands out in the crowd. And I do believe I do believe this is a time where, if you look at the tasks at hand, it's obviously requiring deep sense of diplomacy and political experience, which obviously exists already in the organization. But what is called for now is to build a strong organization, a unity in spite of the cutbacks financially, not only to respond to the budget changes, but also to make sure that the mission of the organization is carried out. That requires experience on how to lead big organizations, I think, and that's where I play in a better way, I think, than many other candidates that come with the political side of things. At the same time, as I bring that corporate leadership experience, I bring two more things. I have a deep experience with working with humanitarian missions. So again, from the IKEA Foundation backend point of view, I've been part of working with UNHCR for many years. I think the first time I had the opportunity to be invited to support was I think it was 2011. I was invited as then supply chain manager for IKEA to support the organization in modernization of their supply chain. I had the opportunity to support the Better Shelter program with engineering, purchasing skills. Later, I've been part of setting up job constructs through social entrepreneurs, for instance, in Jordan, where I built and overseed, actually on the spot, setting up job opportunities for 400 refugees, which is still working to this day. I worked in the immediate situation after the war broke out in Ukraine, together with UNHCR, the Red Cross and other organizations, both with the IKEA Foundation's support in donations, but also in-kind donations on the ground for shelters in Poland, Czech, Slovak, Hungary, and Romania. And then I think the last interesting piece where I've been working very deep with the organization is to find ways to both change the narrative and to create job opportunities for refugees, in particular in Europe, but in other places too. We have taken about 3,000 people through a training program and an employment program called Skills for Employment. So we know that it's not only possible to change the narrative, it's actually possible to bring the value and the assets of refugees as a community and as individuals to the business community.
Right. So the work that you've done with IKEA has been quite interesting, but it's been quite limited in terms of scale. You're now dealing with a population of some 122 million people forcibly removed from their homes. So how do you kind of see applying, I mean, you've been focused on jobs. There's been a lot of criticism in the past of UNHCR for not being able to transition refugees out of a permanent state of being a refugee. Camps that have been in existence for many, many decades. How do you see that sort of background kind of playing into this effort to sort of deal with this on a scale you've never seen before? I mean, in the business world you have, but not in terms of addressing refugee issues.
Well, I think only the UNHCR, of course, have the mandate to address those 122 million, and the part of that, the big part of that, with more than 30 million people that are actually within the mandate of UNHCR. I think in two ways, maybe three even. To start with, I think it's incredibly important to lead from the mandate of UNHCR, which is about protecting the rights and make sure you provide safety and solutions for refugees to start with. This work needs to continue, both the work that the agency have done so brilliantly for many years, but also to continue to improve the preparedness for the things that we have in the nearby future. And then to your question, together with other UN agencies, I would like to engage in the topics in the bigger picture, which includes, as you said, the solutions to find ways to avoid permanent setups and structures, which we have seen too many of the years behind us. Here again, my corporate experience comes as an asset, but also my vast network for working in global governance with corporate leaders and government leaders in other topics for many years. I think the corporate side is willing and has a role to play, not only in the acute side of things, but also in how do we actually bring people out of the permanentization of the problem. And on top of that, we need to, from many places, address the root causes. climate change and human conflict to make sure that we limit the burden or reduce the burden on people in the future. These are, of course, incredibly difficult tasks, and there are other agencies and parts in the world that need to act on it. But I think the voice of UNHCR and the understanding of the impact of conflict will be incredibly important. And I hope to be one of the leaders that bring a spotlight on the problems, but also what we need to do to resolve the many parts.
Right. So part of the challenge for UNHCR is selling itself to the donors, to other key stakeholders. Have you seen the United States has really taken a turn on its kind of approach to refugees, has a very negative attitude towards it. The Europeans have been shifting funding away from foreign aid to military spending because of the Russia-Ukraine war. How do you kind of sell UNHCR to these, I mean, will you be going to Washington? Have you ever met Trump before? How do you make the case to the Europeans that they should return to kind of funding the organization in the way that they have in the past?
Very good. I think to start with, I need to speak with humility from being today an outsider from the system and an applicant and a candidate to the position. So with all the respect of all the great work that is already being done, I think to start with, I think it is an acute crisis from a financing, but at the heart of that is also, of course, a great risk of putting people at risk, which is not good. So the drastic way the financing preconditions have changed recently is putting a lot of pressure, not only on, of course, the organization, but the task at hand. At the same time, to also give credit to the past years, there has been, you referred to the US, I think the US, both administrations recently have flagged that they both see that the US have taken maybe a greater share of responsibility, at least that's how the US have seen it from a financial point of view. And secondly, have asked for resolute actions when it comes to proof points on effectiveness, efficiency of the organization. And today, I think there is an opportunity to build trust through actions and showing resolute decisions to make the organization more effective. Now, in my line of work, that is not something you do only by cutting down, but that's something you do by transforming, investing, and proving that you actually spend more dollars to where the dollars and euros were intended from the beginning. I do believe, after meeting several of the donors and several of the host countries, that there is a lot of common ground. Everybody wants to resolve the situations. People, leaders from different countries, of course, want to respect and act on the incredibly important humanitarian agency, but also want to find solutions to minimize the risks and the damages long term. So therefore, I find both listening to donors and to hosts that there is an opportunity to overcome some of the misunderstandings, to bring common ground. And I hope to also persuade countries to support in that process, so that the tool of reducing financing is not that is not what's going to be needed in order to respond to the demands of the future. Unfortunately, we are in a tight financial situation already, but I hope to gain support from countries to make sure that we act on the current situation and we make something better into the future.
So I recall that when Guterres was the High Commissioner, that he used to frequently take visits to Washington, and he really went to great lengths to cultivate relations with the appropriators on Congress, who basically, or at least in the past, were the ones who really controlled the purse strings. Maybe that's changed a bit now, but to what degree do you think that's going to be something that you would focus on, that you would really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of trying to figure out pockets of potential support or opposition in the US that could help make your case?
So I think, obviously, I would be very keen on making sure I hear all stakeholders' voices. The voices of the donors, as you refer to, the voices of the host countries. US is both, by the way, as you referred to Washington, D.C. I think in my leadership, in my career, I don't view leadership as being the top person of an organization who knows it all. I think the role of a leader is to be good at deep listening by building trust through dialogue and creating common space and common ground. And then, of course, to show courage and enthusiasm and optimism in making sure that we can deliver to something better together. Again, I've met many of the representatives of hosts and of donors, and I never felt low energy, and I never felt that there is an impossibility of creating common ground. On the contrary, so I think my role will be to show up, to listen, but also to bring the parties together to make sure that we actually collectively build a stronger vision for the future.
Right. So we talked a bit about the private sector role, but maybe if you could flesh that out a bit. I mean, where do you see? I mean, there's a lot of talk around the UN these days, particularly with cuts in funding, donors pulling back, that there's a role, there needs to be a bigger role for the private sector, both in broad financing, funding, investment on key development goals, and that sort of thing. But where do you see the private sector kind of really leaning in on sort of the operational level in the sense of the sort of work that IKEA did in the past, or in, you know, basic funding for UNHCR to carry out its operations? And, you know, is it possible for the private sector to fill much of the gap that has sort of been created by the withdrawal of some of the key donors?
Thank you. Well, I think the answer is almost in your question, but to start with, of course, I couldn't make commitments in blanco on the community's behalf here. But I know for a fact that there are a lot of companies out there who want to contribute, both in acute crisis situation and in long-term solutions. And the reason I know that, I've seen that live on the ground, in both, for instance, the immediate impact after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. The interesting thing, in the most effective way companies can contribute typically in such a situation is not necessarily through donations, even if that is, of course, very welcomed. But a company like IKEA supporting with in-kind donations of beds, mattresses, etc., which is our core business. How other organizations can support with payment solutions, how companies like Uber supports with mobility and so forth. So corporates have their specialities, and there are several of them that fits in to the support in a much more hands-on way. And that needs to, of course, come with an invitation and a collaboration, not only in the acute moment, but maybe even in a preparedness. More than so, I know for a fact that companies are willing to support in the job creation side. There are actually, in so many parts of our world, we sit with shortages of labor, shortages of motivated people who are ready to step in different parts of our companies. And very often it's just a mismatch in the structure on how do you connect that. In the Skills for Employment program that we've been running with more than 3,000 people, this is a program where we have invited a lot of other companies who are basically joining and replicating what we have done. And there are other companies, by the way, an organization who work with a similar approach. So I think there is a willingness. There is a need for an orchestration and a way of structurally connect the dots here. But I'm quite sure we can engage the public sector much more in the future than in the past.
Right. So in terms of like looking ahead, I mean, do you see the whole narrative has been about the pullback in funding, the need for reform, need for slimming down? I mean, do you see UNHCR as becoming a much smaller organization than it's been over the past decade? And, you know, do you see, you know, kind of room for, you know, that the need for greater cuts, greater reform in the organization as you kind of move forward, if you get this job?
Very good. Well, if I get the opportunity to lead the organization, I would oversee a creation of a more effective organization, both to respond to the calls from donor countries, but also because I deeply believe there is an opportunity. I think it would be the wrong approach to get obsessed about getting smaller. It can be very good to shrink an organization if you at the same time make sure that you fulfill your mission. What I do believe is important is to make sure money is moved to where it's needed, to on the ground for the refugee acute situations, but also the long-term solutions. And that in itself is a trust builder for the organization. I have, during several occasions, been part of the last years, deep financial pressure from shrinking markets, from inflation-based economy, from closures during the pandemic. And at the same time, I built an effective organization with higher coworker satisfaction. So this is not about stepping in and slashing. It's about creating an agenda that people believe in and bring optimism that we actually are capable not only to fulfill the mission with less money, but actually make something much better into the future. This inspires me and excites me as an opportunity. And I have to say, with the respect of all the focus today on the financing topic and the acute situation, I think it's important not to believe this is the topic for the future. The topic is the number of refugees and the solutions, and to make sure we build a resilient UNHCR who is ready to tackle the future, the current and the future situations, but also contribute to a system where we actually improve the conditions for people overall. So the financing part and the structural thing that needs to happen, I see as one of the short-term things that needs to be addressed. And then we should go onwards to the future and make something better together.
Right. So the 1951 Convention places obligations on governments to follow the rules of the road in terms of how they deal with refugees, asylum seekers, and the
Yes.
like. Those basic principles are being challenged today, particularly by the US, but not only by the US. And so I'm curious to your views on whether you see these basic principles eroding, whether you think that we can count on them, or whether we're entering a new world where the convention and the basic rules of the road are going to be rewritten in a way that is, damaging to refugees.
So I take the questioning of some of the principles and the way the agreement has been made as also a sign of frustration in the system from different angles. You mentioned a couple of them. I think, for me personally, I think the 1951 Convention is the foundation of the mandate for UNHCR. So that is the starting point. Personally, I don't think the Convention is the issue. The Convention builds not only on post-World War II agreements and necessities, it builds on cultural support for people that goes thousands of years back in time. I do believe it's the implementation and the understanding of it that should be at the heart. But obviously, I will place myself open to listen to and understand different aspects and angles of it. At this moment, I think I want to underline that the convention is what gives the organization its mandate. And as long as it's there, that's what should be honored, and that's what should be at the heart of the organization's task going forward.
Well, this is probably a difficult question because it involves politics
I think the whole topic involves politics.
yeah, and you have less control over it. But one of I mentioned it earlier, but one of the sort of frustrations is that these camps are set up, whether it's in Bangladesh with the Rohingya, whether it's in Kenya, you have these massive camps for the displaced, for refugees, and they sort of seem to persist forever, and there doesn't seem to be an effective transition that moves these populations beyond that. And I'm just sort of curious if let's look at look at the Rohingya, or, what's happening today in Sudan. How do you see these specific cases? Gaza is sort of a different case because they're all internally displaced, and it's a sort of mandate than you have at with the High Commissioner's office. But how do you kind of think about, here we have this situation, we have this population, how do we move them out of there? How do they move them into a kind of regular life where they're working, where they're no longer kind of trapped in this sort of purgatory?
I love your question because the answer is almost in your question. I think this is the heart of the conversation going forward. The financial situation, the effectiveness of the organization, these are means that needs to be resolved as soon as possible in order to focus on the real topics, which is then how do we limit or abolish or react to the atrocities that we see today in human conflict, in climate change, and other drivers of, but particularly these two drivers to add to the number of refugees as we have seen the last 10 years. It is true that in parts of the world, we have seen almost permanentization of camps and situations for refugees. But it's also true, it's not only a vision or an idea that is possible to go the other direction. We have seen in Jordan, where I've been part myself, to create job opportunities, to not only provide income for people and contribution to society, but to provide dignity. We have seen, by the way, in Syria as one of the examples where people have started to return as one of the ways of actually moving in the upper part of this process. We have seen in places like Colombia, but many more also, that refugees are actually giving status, given the opportunity to contribute to society, and thereby becoming an asset for development and for society at large, while moving out of the risk of ending up in a permanent situation. There's much work that needs to be done in order to make this part of every situation in the world. Here, UNHCR needs to work together with other UN agencies and understand the direct responsibilities for the organizations to make sure that we contribute to not only responding to the here and now situations. It's one of the most important priorities for the future.
Right. I know our time is running short, so why don't I finish with the last question? I'll actually come back to a question I asked earlier, but I'm curious if you're a businessman. President Trump is a businessman. He likes people in the business world. He's comfortable with them. I'm curious if you've ever met him and what you would say to him to try to convince him to support, the vision and the mandate of the High Commissioner for Refugees.
Well, as a business person, I think I'm happy to meet people with that background. I think very often business people are also placed in a compartment where there are some realities and some myths as well. But I think I see myself as a leader. I am a negotiator. I started my time in IKEA basically as a negotiator, buying products for IKEA in many places. And I am not shy about loving the game of business as well. But my role is mostly to lead and develop and transform organizations. In that capacity, I would gladly, and I look forward to having the opportunity to work together with leaders to create a situation of win-win. Always starts by deep listening, by understanding the counterparty's needs and views, not necessarily always agree on every detail on it, but show the respect of confirming the different perspectives. And then you start with establishing common ground. There might be differences, but start with what you actually agree on. And then in that, I look forward to discussions with representatives of governments in many places, obviously including the US, who has traditionally such an important role. And actually not only from its place of power in the world, it is also representative of being both a host and a donor. So the voice of the US would, of course, be incredibly important to hear and to seek collaboration with. And that was something I would look forward to.
Great. I see you've already acquired some of the diplomatic skills that you will need because you have somehow avoided mentioning the word Trump during the conversation. But thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Colum.
You're spending this time with us, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Colum.